Hello, dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. Tonight was supposed to be a simple birthday dinner. Laughter, warmth, a few jokes, and maybe a shared slice of cake. At least that's what Clara had hoped for when she and her husband, Ethan, arrived at her parents' house that evening. The dining hall looked perfect, candles flickering, soft music playing, and a table filled with food. Yet beneath the cozy glow, an unmistakable tension hung in the air. Her family greeted her with smiles that felt a little too practiced. Her mother adjusted her necklace, her father cleared his throat, and her brother Ryan smirked the moment he saw Ethan. They all sat around the table, her parents, siblings, cousins, and a few family friends. Conversations started light but quickly turned sharp, aimed like darts at Ethan, who sat quietly beside her, dressed simply in his plain shirt and modest watch. They had always thought he wasn't good enough for her. Too quiet, too humble, too content with his small repair shop. To them, Ethan lacked the sparkle of ambition that they admired in the men they compared him to. As everyone began eating, Ryan leaned back in his chair and said with a half-smile, "So, Ethan, how's that little shop of yours going? Still waiting for your big break?" The table erupted in laughter. Even her cousins giggled behind their hands. Ethan didn't flinch. He smiled politely and replied, "It's steady." His calmness almost seemed to irritate them more. Clara felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother leaned toward an aunt and whispered loud enough for Clara to hear, "He should have aimed higher. My daughter deserved better." The words pierced her heart like needles. The conversation continued, filled with laughter that had an edge to it. Every sentence carried a layer of mockery, subtle enough to pass as humor, but sharp enough to hurt. Clara kept her eyes on her plate, forcing a smile whenever someone looked her way. She could feel the heat of humiliation crawling up her neck. Ethan just kept his composure, answering every question with patience and grace, never once reacting to the sarcasm thrown his way. Inside, Clara was battling emotions she didn't want to admit. She loved Ethan deeply, but sitting there, surrounded by judgmental faces, she felt ashamed. She thought about their modest apartment, his old car, and the long hours he spent working in his shop. Then she thought about her cousin's comment. Her ex-boyfriend had just bought a luxury car and opened another branch of his business. A whisper crept into her mind. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she had settled too soon. The dinner reached the moment of gift-giving. One by one, her family presented her with expensive presents, a designer handbag, a gold bracelet, perfume wrapped in ribbons. Then Ethan handed her a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a handmade wooden jewelry box, carefully carved, polished with love, and lined with soft fabric. She could smell the faint scent of cedar and recognize the time and effort that went into it. Her mother forced a tight smile. "Oh, how rustic," she said, stretching the word as though it tasted odd in her mouth. One of her cousins snickered. "He's really into DIY, huh? That's cute." The room chuckled again. Clara's face burned. She placed the box aside gently, avoiding Ethan's gaze. He noticed, of course, but said nothing. His silence only made her more uneasy. It wasn't the silence of weakness. It was calm, steady, unbothered. And that, somehow, made her feel worse. When the dinner finally ended, Clara was relieved. They said their goodbyes, and Ethan thanked everyone for having them. His politeness only seemed to irritate her family further, as if they wanted him to lose his temper so they could justify their low opinion of him. But he never did. The car ride home was filled with silence. The streetlights passed like flickers of memory against the window. Clara sat with her arms crossed, replaying the night's insults, the laughter, the humiliation. She couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why don't you ever defend yourself?" she burst out, her voice trembling with frustration. "You just sit there and let them treat you like a joke." Ethan didn't turn to look at her right away. His hands stayed steady on the wheel. "Finally," he said softly, "because I don't need to prove myself to Noise." She stared at him, confused and angry. "Noise? That's your excuse." He glanced at her, eyes calm and steady. "They're loud because they need to be heard." I'm quiet because I already know who I am. Clara rolled her eyes and looked out the window. His words made her feel small, not because he meant to belittle her, but because deep down, she knew he was right. She didn't understand how he could stay so composed, so unshaken, while she felt like breaking apart inside. The rest of the ride was wordless. When they reached home, Ethan carried the gifts inside and placed the handmade jewelry box gently on the table. He didn't mention the dinner again. Clara went to bed still feeling a mixture of shame, anger, and confusion. As she lay there in the dark, she couldn't stop thinking about him. How he'd endured every insult with quiet grace. There was a storm behind his calm, she realized. A kind of strength she didn't yet understand. Ethan had faced the mockery of everyone she cared about and still managed to hold his head high, not because he was unaffected, but because he had something deeper, a peace she had yet to discover. And as she drifted to sleep, one thought haunted her. Maybe the calm that made him look weak was actually the very thing that made him strong. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the echoes of laughter from dinner replayed in her head. Every mocking word, every smirk, every glance burned through her memory like a cruel reminder of what her family thought of her husband. She could still hear Ryan's tone, her mother's whispers, and the way everyone seemed to agree. She had made a mistake marrying Ethan. Ethan slept beside her, breathing calmly, as if untouched by the humiliation. But Clara's mind refused to rest. Her heart ached, not only for the insults they'd thrown at him, but for her own silence. She hadn't defended him. She had sat there, letting their words slice through him, through them, and done nothing. The shame was unbearable. In the quiet, she turned toward him and whispered, almost to herself, "Why can't you just be more impressive?" His eyes opened slowly. There was no anger in them, no hurt, only calm understanding. "Impressive to who?" he asked softly. She had no answer. She turned away, feeling smaller than ever. His words lingered in the dark, echoing louder than her family's laughter. As she closed her eyes, her mind drifted back to the beginning, to when everything was simple. She remembered their early days, when Ethan used to fix her old bicycle just so they could ride together to the park. He wasn't rich, but he was thoughtful in ways that mattered. He'd show up with small surprises, her favorite tea, a hand-drawn note, a flower plucked from the roadside. He volunteered to teach math to local kids, often spending hours helping them without ever expecting a reward. He wasn't flashy or loud, but there was something about his calm that made her feel safe. She had fallen for that quiet confidence, the way he carried himself without needing attention. The world might not have noticed him, but she did. She remembered the night he proposed, under a flickering streetlight, holding a simple ring, his hands trembling. His voice had been steady, though, when he said, "I may not have much, but I'll give you a life full of honesty." She had believed him, and he had kept that promise. But somewhere along the way, she began to doubt if honesty was enough. Now, years later, reality weighed heavy. Clara sat on the couch, scrolling through social media, watching as her friends posted photos of beach vacations, diamond necklaces, and luxury cars. Their husbands were CEOs, engineers, bankers. Each picture was a reminder of what she didn't have, what Ethan wasn't. She glanced at her phone again and froze when a message appeared. It was from Lucas, her ex. "You still with that guy? You always deserved better." Her breath caught. She stared at the message for a long time, not typing, not deleting, just staring. She didn't reply, but something inside her cracked. At that moment, Ethan quietly walked in, holding a cup of tea. He saw the message on the screen. For a brief second, his eyes flickered, not with anger, but with something deeper. He didn't say a word. He simply placed the cup on the table, turned around, and left the room. The door closed softly behind him, but the silence that followed was deafening. A month passed, and the tension between them lingered, unspoken, but heavy. Then came her cousin's engagement party. Clara didn't want to go, but her family insisted. Ethan, as always, agreed without complaint. The venue was grand, filled with expensive dresses and glittering suits. Waiters carried trays of champagne as laughter filled the hall. Ethan, in his simple dark suit, stood quietly beside her, content with a small smile. Clara could feel eyes on them. Her aunt leaned to another relative and said just loud enough for her to hear, "Still no car? He must be saving for a bicycle upgrade." The laughter that followed made Clara's face burn. Ethan pretended not to hear, adjusting his tie calmly. His composure made her chest tighten. Why couldn't he ever show them he wasn't weak? Why did he let them mock him? The night dragged on until it was time for the toasts. Her cousin's fiancé stood, thanking everyone for coming. Then, someone, she wasn't even sure who, raised their glass and said with a smirk, "Let's toast to men who actually provide for their wives." The room erupted with laughter again. All eyes turned, predictably, to Ethan. Clara's heart pounded. The humiliation, the frustration, the guilt, it all boiled over. She slammed her glass down and shouted, "Enough!" Her voice trembled, more desperate than angry. The laughter faded briefly, but only for a moment. Ethan remained calm, sipping his drink as if nothing had happened. That quiet strength, the same calm that used to comfort her, now confused her more than ever. Then it happened. The moment everything changed. Someone near the front, perhaps emboldened by the wine, leaned forward and said with a cruel grin, "Ethan, what do you even bring to this marriage besides silence?" The room went still. Dozens of eyes shifted toward him, waiting for the quiet man to finally crack. Even Clara held her breath. Ethan stood up slowly. He didn't look angry. His movements were deliberate, his voice steady when he spoke. "You'll all see what I bring," he said, looking around the room, "when the noise fades and truth speaks louder than pride." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried, clear, calm, and strangely powerful. For a moment, no one moved. No one laughed. The air seemed to thicken, every word hanging there, undeniable. Then someone scoffed. "Such drama," they muttered, breaking the tension. A few others chuckled awkwardly, eager to move on. But the laughter felt hollow now. Clara couldn't look away from him. Ethan sat down again, expression unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Yet something inside her shifted. The room returned to its chatter, but his words stayed, echoing in her mind, quiet yet unshakable. She didn't know why, but for the first time, she felt that maybe his silence wasn't emptiness at all. Maybe it was strength waiting for its moment to be heard. Life went on after that night, but something in the air had changed. The laughter from the party still echoed in Clara's mind, mingled with Ethan's calm words that refused to fade. "You'll all see what I bring, when the noise fades and truth speaks louder than pride." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but those words replayed in her thoughts over and over again. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed. He woke up early, went to his repair shop, came home late, and treated her with the same gentle patience he always had. But now, Clara started noticing things she hadn't before, small details that made her uneasy. He began taking phone calls in another room, his voice low and calm. Some nights, he'd leave after dinner, saying he had work to finish. He started wearing a cleaner shirt, polishing his shoes before leaving, and sometimes came home smelling faintly of new cologne. When she asked who he was meeting, he simply said, "People who care about what I'm building." The words sounded innocent, but her mind spun with suspicion. The more secretive he became, the more restless she grew. One night, she waited up for him. The clock ticked past midnight before she heard his key in the door. Ethan walked in quietly, as always. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, a faint trace of fatigue on his face, but there was a spark in his eyes she couldn't read. "Who are you meeting every night?" she demanded before he could even take off his shoes. "And don't tell me it's about that little shop again." He paused, then sighed. "You'll see soon, Clara." "See what?" she snapped, her voice trembling. "You're always saying that. You're always hiding behind that stupid calm." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, not angry, not defensive, just quietly thoughtful. Then, without saying a word, he stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her. "Trust me one more time," he whispered. Clara didn't hug him back. Her hands hung by her sides, her mind full of doubt and confusion. Trust was easy to talk about, but hard to feel when you didn't understand what was happening. The next morning brought something unexpected. Clara was sipping her coffee when a black car stopped in front of their house. A tall, well-dressed man stepped out, holding a leather folder. He shook Ethan's hand firmly, spoke for a few minutes, then handed him an envelope before driving away. Clara watched from the window, her stomach twisting. Ethan walked back inside, calm as ever, the envelope tucked neatly under his arm. When she asked who it was, he only said, "A friend." Then he kissed her on the forehead and left for work. That evening, curiosity got the better of her. She searched his desk, something she'd never done before, and found the same envelope resting there. Inside was a thick stack of papers. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It wasn't a bill or a letter. It was a business proposal. The header read, "Partnership Agreement, Evolve Tech Innovations," and below it, in bold letters, was Ethan's name, co-founder and lead developer. Clara's heart raced. She flipped through the pages, scanning technical terms she didn't understand. Designs for affordable, reparable electronic devices, business projections, partnerships. She could barely process it. Her quiet, modest husband, the man everyone mocked, was building a technology company. Her mind spun back to all those late nights, the secret phone calls, the long hours. They weren't signs of betrayal or deceit. They were signs of something far greater, something he had never spoken about because he didn't need to prove himself. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, the proposal spread across her lap. For the first time, she realized she didn't know the full story of the man she married. And that story began years before, long before the laughter and the judgment. Ethan had always been quietly driven. Long before they met, he'd spent evenings in his small workshop, tinkering with broken radios, discarded phones, and old appliances. His dream wasn't to get rich, but to build things that lasted. He believed that people shouldn't have to throw away what could be fixed, that quality and compassion could coexist with innovation. But the world didn't make it easy. Investors ignored him. Banks turned him down. Everyone told him he was wasting his time. So, he kept going quietly, using whatever little he earned from his shop to fund his experiments. Then one day, everything changed. A philanthropist, a man known for supporting sustainable projects, happened to visit the neighborhood. His car had broken down, and Ethan repaired it for free when he learned the man couldn't find help nearby. The philanthropist was surprised by Ethan's humility and skill. He asked a few questions, listened to Ethan's ideas, and saw potential in him. They stayed in touch. Months later, that same philanthropist offered to become a silent investor, helping Ethan set up his small prototype lab. But Ethan made one condition. His work would stay anonymous until it was ready to make a real impact. He didn't want fame, he wanted results. While everyone else mocked him, while Clara's family dismissed him, he was quietly building something meaningful. Each late night, each mysterious meeting, each quiet moment of reflection, they were pieces of a larger plan taking shape. Now, that plan was nearly ready to step into the light. Clara sat there, her heart swelling with a mix of awe, guilt, and disbelief. The same man she'd once begged to be more impressive had been quietly doing exactly that, not for attention, not for validation, but because that was who he was. The calm wasn't a mask. It was strength. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was purpose. And the man she thought she understood had just become a mystery she wanted to rediscover all over again. A few weeks later, Clara found herself sitting beside her family at an elegant charity gala. The hall shimmered with golden lights, soft music playing in the background. It was the kind of event her family adored, full of influential people, polished conversations, and polite laughter. They had no idea what was about to happen. Clara sat quietly, still carrying the weight of everything she had discovered about Ethan, his secret work, his humility, his strength. She hadn't told her family yet. She didn't know how. A part of her wanted them to see it for themselves. Then the host took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's keynote speaker, a man whose work has been transforming lives in ways most of us take for granted. Mr. Ethan Cole. The words hit Clara's family like a wave. Her mother's fork froze midair. Her brother turned sharply toward the stage. Clara's heart pounded. Ethan appeared, dressed in a black suit that fit him perfectly. He walked with quiet confidence, not arrogance, not showmanship, but the ease of someone who had nothing to prove anymore. The crowd clapped politely at first, then louder as he reached the podium. When he began to speak, the room seemed to fall into silence. He didn't talk about profits or achievements. Instead, he spoke about people, the ones who fixed, built, and gave quietly without recognition. He talked about dignity, humility, and purpose. Real success, he said, his voice calm but steady, is not measured by noise or applause, but by the difference we make when no one is watching. There was a stillness for a moment, and then a wave of applause rolled through the hall. The sound was thunderous, genuine. Clara's mother's lips parted slightly in disbelief. Her brother stared, speechless. The same man they once called unambitious now stood on stage, inspiring a room full of leaders and innovators. As the applause continued, Ethan smiled faintly and looked out into the audience, and for just a second, his eyes met Clara's. It wasn't pride in his gaze. It was peace. When the time came for awards, Ethan was called back to the stage. For outstanding innovation in social good, the presenter announced, "We honor Mr. Ethan Cole, whose vision for accessible technology is changing lives across communities." Clara's hands trembled as she clapped. Her vision blurred with tears. And in that moment, his words from weeks ago echoed through her mind like a whisper carried by the wind. "You'll all see what I bring, when the noise fades and truth speaks louder than pride." The crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Ethan bowed his head slightly, humble as ever. Clara pressed a hand to her chest, pride and regret intertwining. Pride for the man he was, regret for the times she'd doubted him. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled, her brother approached Ethan awkwardly. His usual arrogance was gone. "Ethan, I didn't know," he said quietly. Ethan smiled, his calm still unshaken. "You didn't need to," he replied. "That's the point." Her mother came next, her voice trembling. "We misjudged you, son." Ethan turned to her gently, his tone kind but firm. "You judged what you could see. I was building what you couldn't." The words hung in the air, simple but powerful. For a long time, no one spoke. Clara's family stood there, humbled, their earlier pride stripped away by the truth standing before them. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He simply smiled, thanked them, and turned back toward the stage, where people were still waiting to shake his hand. Clara watched him, realizing that the calmness she once mistook for weakness was actually the purest form of strength. It was the strength to stay silent while the world doubted you, and the grace to forgive when it finally saw you clearly. That night, when they returned home from the gala, Clara couldn't hold it in any longer. The weight of guilt and admiration pressed on her chest until the tears finally came. She turned toward Ethan, her voice trembling. "I should have defended you," she whispered. "I let them humiliate you. I let them laugh, and I said nothing." Ethan looked at her with that same gentle calm she had once mistaken for indifference. He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "No one can humiliate you without your permission," he said softly. "And I was never angry, Clara, just patient." She broke down, crying into his shoulder. "How do you stay so calm through everything? How can you be this kind after everything they said?" Ethan smiled faintly, brushing away her tears. "Because truth doesn't shout," he replied. "It simply waits. And when the time is right, it speaks for itself." Clara leaned into him, her heart aching with love and regret. She realized that while she'd been searching for pride in him, he had already found peace in himself. The silence she once feared had always been his quiet strength. A year later, everything had changed. Clara's voice carried over the scenes of a new life, brighter, softer, fuller. 1 year later, she narrated, his company helps thousands of families. The same people who once mocked him now quote him. Images followed her words like gentle memories, Ethan teaching kids how to build small solar lamps, families smiling as they used his affordable devices, community centers lit up because of his work. Clara stood beside him, painting their newly renovated home, laughter replacing the tension that once lived between them. On a wooden shelf sat the handmade jewelry box Ethan had given her that night long ago, the one she had once placed aside in shame. Now, it gleamed proudly under the sunlight, a reminder of the value she had once failed to see. As music swelled softly, Clara's final words echoed like a quiet truth carried by time. Everyone mocked my husband, until he spoke one calm sentence. But it wasn't that sentence that changed everything. It was the calm behind it, the strength of a man who didn't need to prove his worth to those who never saw it. The camera lingered on Ethan one last time, standing in his workshop, sunlight streaming through the windows. Children surrounded him, laughing as they worked with their small tools, fixing and creating under his patient guidance. The hum of his machines filled the space, a quiet melody of purpose and peace. And as he smiled, wiping his hands on a rag, the scene faded, leaving only the soft golden glow of his world behind. The calm that changed everything. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe our channel Awesome Visual Story.